scale, which is just...
Well, it's interesting because like the film about the back brace, they use sort of household objects. There's a section where they use just a kitchen sponge as for the basis of one of the characters. And then you're right, it adds just a whole level of familiarity and also a poignancy to see these sort of ordinary objects used, because it emphasizes the meaning of what's going on in the film, but it also adds a sort of innovative, experimental element. That's really the great thing about animation. You can use anything. Like I've made films with candy, I've made films with just trash that I picked up off the street in front of my studio. I've made films with sand, with foam core board characters, with characters made out of sheets of copper. I didn't know that much about how puppets were made. So I would just make puppets from like pipe cleaners, or I would just take any kind of wire and just, hot glue the wire onto something else. And, it's a great medium for experimentation. And I think in many ways, in the United States, animation has been sort of kept separate from the art world.
Yeah.
Because it developed along with live action documentary as part of commercial cinema. So people in this country don't really think of animation as having a place in the art museums or galleries. But you go to Europe or Japan and you'll see it in museums and galleries. But in this country it hasn't quite gotten there yet. But right now we're on this really interesting time where people are using animation as artists, and they're doing animated installations. Like Rose Bond from Portland is doing these really incredible animated installations that you can see at night in the windows of buildings. I think we're going to see more of this. We're going to see installation work, and it's going to really find a place, I think, in the museums of this country. I hope so. I've always hoped this. It hasn't happened as fast as I wanted it.
And your particular brand of animation, for me, it's very strong and aesthetically in terms of being compositionally sound, and the palette's very striking, and it does look like artwork to me that moves, and that's really just a feast for the eyes. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons your abstract animation works so well, is it's just beautiful to see, even if you don't know what it means.
Well, luckily I had a background as a painter and as a printmaker, but there is a tiny genre of animation that fits into the category of visionary art. And really the technical definition of outsider art or visionary art is artists that have not had traditional training like in art schools. And there are people in animation that fall into that category, and I just love seeing that work. I can't remember his name, but there's a filmmaker from Seattle that falls into that category. And, that's really amazing to see work from people that have not had that art background and are just purely experimenting from their own lives, their own experience.
Another really interesting thing you've done as part of your CV is, I know you've worked with some pretty high-power recording artists making music videos, which is another little niche that animation has had a role in, in this country certainly. And that's, for me, that's really fascinating. I grew up during the MTV era, and it was almost like it was like they were sneaking art into the mainstream popular culture by putting it in these.
Well, I haven't directed any music videos, but I've directed animation segments for Jim Blashfield of Portland. And it's really interesting to look at the history of music videos, because very, very early on when they started making them, people wanted, I guess it was the musicians, the music artists that wanted to work with animators. So there's an early one for Peter Gabriel where lots of different animators worked on it, but the people I can remember are the Aardman filmmakers who went on to do, Wallace and Gromit. And that stuff is just so inventive. And I think it sort of started off that whole genre of MTV work with real, experimental processes, that included a lot of different techniques in one video, and it was pretty great how it started. I think, Jim Blashfield also went on to do, like Michael Jackson, just some of the most important videos ever made. But as the budgets got smaller and smaller, they couldn't afford to do that anymore, unfortunately. So I think you're seeing fewer and fewer fully animated videos. But occasionally there'll be artists like Bjork,
Yeah.
who still
she's-
can command the budgets and get the best people in the world and do the most inventive, exciting.
And she seems to be an artist, a visual artist, almost as much as a musician. I know she's very into experimental visual installation art and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
She's really fascinating.